Good day, everyone, and thank you for listening to Vintage Motocross Radio. I am your host, Joe Abadi. I'd like to thank the sponsors today, Preston Petty, the legend continues, Amsoil, the first in synthetic since 1973, Vintco, keep the ride going, and, of course, Vintage Motocross Q&A, which is on Facebook Live every Wednesday night at 6 a.m. My guest today was a pioneering motocross and off-road racer from Sweden who immigrated to the United States to help introduce motocross racing to America in the late 60s. He was a leading international six-day trials rider during the 60s and 70s. When Edson Dye started his Inter-Am motocross series in 71, my guest won 4 of the 5 500cc support class races on a very special titanium-framed Husqvarna. He also helped his buddy Torsten Holman begin to sell European motocross gear in America. I'm so happy to announce my guest this morning is Mr. Lars Larsson. Lars, are you there?
Yes, good morning to you.
Good morning, and thank you for being here with us today.
Well, it's nice to have the opportunity to talk about motocross, something we don't do very often.
well, we're going to be talking about that and a whole lot of other things this morning too here, Lars. So let's get right into it. I always like to know about when my guests first became interested in motorcycling in their youth, and you were of course born and grew up in Sweden. So how did you become interested in motorcycles there?
Well, you know, it was after the war.
Yeah.
Motorcycling, speedway, and scrambling, as they called it in the beginning, it was very, very, very popular. As a matter of fact, speedway today is the third largest public sport in Sweden. So it was, I mean, people talked motorcycling, and on top of it, in the block where I lived with my parents, a few houses down the street, there was 3 speedway riders that had their workshop down in a basement of a big house there. And for some odd reason, I was the only kid that was allowed down there. And I was there all the time getting oil and dirty, and you know, and they even took me to some of their practice races. And so I was gonna, from childhood, late 40s, I was gonna be a speedway rider.
So,
which never occurred, but the interest was there due to that fact, I think. Sure.
I guess you were maybe 8 or 9 years old at that time, and it had, I'm sure, a big impression on you.
Yes, it did. I mean, it was, plus the fact I was very bad at sport, throwing balls and playing soccer, and I was no good at that. So my interest kind of stayed around motorcycling.
Yeah, and it happened, I think, for many of us too, Lars. So many kids growing up had that, or didn't have that necessarily a good athletic ability, so they went on to motorsports much like you did. So let me ask you this now. Did as a teenager in the motorcycle industry in Sweden, did you work with motorcycles, and what was your job there growing up? What were some of the influential things that you did?
Well, I would say that none of the above. I mean, I started to work when I was 11 years old. I don't really know what you call it. You worked like in a grocery shop, and you ran people. You helped old ladies to get their stuff to their house and things like that, and so on. And then after school, I went into a 3-year, I guess you call it college, for a mechanic, to be a car mechanic. And it was, when I started there, I had a motorcycle before I had a driver license, and I got caught by the cops driving the darn thing. But when I started at the car dealership. It's a Ford dealership. There was a guy there that had just started to ride motocross. And I said, oh, wow. And also enduro. And so he talked me into take my bike and go and ride an enduro. And this was 1959. So that's where it started.
So
it hasn't stopped yet.
your first race was in 1959 in an enduro. What kind of bike did you have, Lars?
It was a Swedish motorcycle. It was called NV, and with a 175 Sax engine in it. There was a factory in Uppsala, north of Stockholm, that made motorcycles for many, many years. And that was the first one. And the race I remember was in Södertälje, which is about 25 miles south of Stockholm. And, the start was very early in the morning. And so I had to ride on the bike from my house because we didn't have any car or van or anything.
Right.
So you had to leave very early in the dark and drive that motorcycle down to where they're going to start the race. And then you raced it, and then you drove it home. and that's the way it was.
So for how long did you race these enduros? How long was it before you actually got into motocross?
No, I mean, it just became, it was late in the 59.
Right.
And then in the 60s, right away, it was, I got a hold of an old Silverpil in Husqvarna and started to go to some junior events.
Junior events
for motocross. And, when the season for motocross was over, which ends usually in early October in Sweden because the weather is getting bad, then you put lights on the bike and you rode enduros until the motocross started again in kind of March, early April.
Right. Now, Lars, you mentioned that it kind of got started in 1959 for you, and you had ridden some enduros. And when I think of Sweden, I mean, you had three of your countrymen that by 1957 were already world champions. Are you there, Lars?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay. You had Sten Lundin, Bill Nilsson, and Rolf Tiblin, who were all world champions between 57 and 67. Were you familiar with them and their careers, and how did that influence you?
Oh, of course. They when I said earlier that motorsport and motocross speedway was a big sport in Sweden, and saying that it got in the daily newspapers. I mean, it was just about any time. I mean, in comparison to, for example, United States, I remember Brad Lackey, first world championship 500. Week later, Danny Laporte won the world championship in the 250 class. Did you read about that in Los Angeles Times or Washington News?
No.
This was pages in the daily newspapers, page up and page down. So, you know all about it. It was as big as, your soccer and ice hockey. Those were the three things, and that's what they wrote about in the newspaper. And especially when they have world championship. But here, we think Supercross, for example, is very big. Is it? Walk down the street and ask the people here in my neighborhood. They say, super what?
Yeah.
Nothing gets written about it. They fill up the stadiums here in San Diego for a Supercross. And the day after, and I mean, it's 40, 50, 60,000 people. Not a word. No, baseball training started in Phoenix or something, or whatever it was, or football or handball, as I call it. It's pages and pages and pages. But there was 60,000 people at the stadium. Not a word.
But
figure that one out.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, it's difficult to figure out. So
Yeah.
But back,
I raced the first Supercross in Los Angeles Coliseum, and they said it was 70,000 people, and I think it was. I didn't read anything about it in the newspaper. It's funny. And so, to answer your question, of course I was influenced by them. And when I started the racing and I got into motocross and everything, I went in to the motor club, Upplands Väsby Motor Club, and which is just north of Stockholm, and I'm from the south of Stockholm. But it was because Tiblin was riding for that club. Mm-hmm. Some other big names. So I got to train with those people, and Rolf and myself and two other guys, we won one year. We won the Swedish Championship in team enduro. So yes, they were big heroes.
Well, Lars, with Sweden is just a little bit bigger than California, if anybody was interested in knowing that. And there were certainly some very talented racers there from the 60s and 70s, as we were just discussing. But it went on, of course, into the 70s, the mid-70s, where you had Hakan Andersson, Torleif Hansen, Hakan Karlqvist, Aki Jansson. And I wonder, with the country being that small and the sport being so popular, did you run across a lot of races with these riders, and what was that like at that time?
Well, as a junior, they always had two divisions, not like here, where we have 18 motos or something. There was 4 motos, 2 for what they call the seniors, and 2 motos for the juniors. And we were riding, I was riding the junior heat or moto, and Tiblin and Alman and all those guys were riding the senior thing. And it was a system. I forgot what it was. I think you had to get 25 points in a year. And that meant if you won a race, you got 2 points, I think, if I remember correctly. And that would move you into the senior division. And then you were right there. But we were all part, in the same area. And things were different. We had, some people had little trailers with a motorcycle they towed behind a car, or like myself, my first car was a 1950 Dodge that I got for a couple of $100, and you put the motorcycle in the back in the trunk and went to the race.
And in Sweden in '66, it seemed like you were racing a lot from the research I was doing, and you just mentioned about you had a little car, a Ford, and you put the bike in the trunk. And then you really got something a whole lot better. Do you remember how this Mercedes came about?
Well, yeah. In '64, I got enough points, so I became the senior. So then, wow, the whole world opened up, and you could see, oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Because also as a senior, you were then allowed to go outside of Sweden into Europe, to Germany, Belgium, France, and race, if you could get a ride there. So you had to get I got me a 1959 Mercedes, the first diesel with a overhead cam, and I got one of the little trailer behind it, just like Tiblin and those guys had it. Hey, you're going first class. You gotta be with it, right?
Yes.
and those trailers, we had extra tanks in them, and in the trunk we had a electric fuel pump, so they were all diesels, and we we bought, diesel from boat owners. It cost basically nothing, and when we were going out of the country, we filled the car up, we filled the tanks in the trailers, we filled that up, and we still had some Jeep cans with the boat fuel, and we could get a long way for a few dollars, basically.
Now, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so and that same thing, that Mercedes, you could fold the passenger seat.
Mm-hmm.
You in the evening you pumped up a rubber mattress. You put your sleeping bag there, and that was your camping until Saturday night. I got a hotel every time, and so that I would sleep and shower good and be ready to race on Sunday, wherever that was. And then Monday it was the Mercedes hotel again.
Did you mentioned earlier about the junior and senior class? Were the motorcycles different sizes too, Lars, or did everybody ride the same type of bike?
Well, it was 250 class and 500 class.
Yeah.
And that was it.
What?
So they had, in other words, they had a junior 250,
yes.
They had a junior 500 class, and 250 and 500 in the senior class.
And what was a popular motorcycle in those classes at that time?
Well, Lundin and Tiblin and those guys in the early 60s, they were on the big BSAs or Husqvarna,
yeah.
Made a few bikes, and Nils Hedlund, Swedish engineer
mm-hmm.
that built motors, and he built some motorcycles, but then started the 250 to come around. And so I would say, I'm trying to think here, but by 66, 67, there was just about no four strokes. It was all two stroke, if I remember. There may be some rider with a big old BSA or something, but the two stroke took over.
In 67, Lars, you were sent to the U.S. after Edison Dye, who was an American businessman. He had purchased a large supply of Husqvarnas, and your job was to come to the United States and sign up dealers and sell bikes and then race those bikes on the weekends.
Well, that is not really the truth. First of all, the whole thing, I mean, some of my buddies said, hey, you're going to America, and being from the south side of Stockholm, mm-hmm. That's a special kind of people. They say they can go do anything on one skate. So I kept my face straight, yeah, sure. But how did you know that? Well, we heard Torsten Harman talk about it. Oh, okay. So at a Swedish championship, I walked up to Torsten. I said, excuse me, but my buddies are telling me I'm going to America, and they got that from you. Oh, shoot, Torsten said, I forgot to tell you. and so they called from Husqvarna and asked me to come down and meet Edison Dye, mm-hmm. and talk about this. And I was actually, that winter, I was going to go to Australia for some racing. But it came up that he was going to start importing the bikes. Torsten had been over there in 66, over here mm-hmm. in 66, running some races. And Edison was smart enough to say, hey, I got to get these motorcycles over here. But he told the factory he needed somebody in San Diego to be the serviceman for the bikes he would sell, and also a guy that could ride the bike a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That was his kind of excuse. And I'm laughing when I'm thinking about this because I was in Poland riding the 6 days enduro on the Swedish trophy team, and he showed up there with a Volkswagen bus, and he said, hi, Lars. And, I didn't speak much English at all. And he said, after this race, you take this bus and out to Brussels, and you fly to Chicago, and I meet you there. Oh, okay. And I thought Chicago, well, that's a suburb of San Diego. And it's quite a ways in between, I think. And he never really intended me to be a service guy in San Diego. So I came to Chicago and New Edison at the airport. I go through custom and nobody there. So I just sit there, and about an hour later, a man came, and he was from Norway. And he said, he saw my bags and stuff. So, you're Lars. Yeah, I'm Lars. Okay, Edison told me to come and get you, and you come to my house, he said. And that's the first time I could have gotten killed very quick in this country. Because we went to his house, and he sat down in one of those lazy boys. I remember this as yesterday. and he turned on the TV, and he fell asleep. And I'm sitting there, okay, what am I going to do? And about half hour or so later, he kind of woke up, and he saw me, and you could see the reaction before he remembered that I was a guest. He could have just shot me right there, being an intruder, But anyway, long story short, 3 days later, Edison shows up, and he's, hi, Lars, welcome to America. Yeah, we got to get a car. We go and buy a used, lucky enough for me, a Ford van.
Yeah.
And we drove from Chicago over to Pentos in Lorain, Ohio, Cleveland.
Okay.
Picked up a bike, and he said, we're going racing. Oh, okay. So we went to Indiana State TT Championship. And we got there in the morning, and we pulled the crate out of the van, and I, started to put the fork on it, and people came around and said they never seen a Husqvarna. So they said, what is this? And he never stopped talking, he just blah, 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 blah. And I'm working on the bike, and they said, well, what are you going to do? Well, he's going to race it. Well, he don't have a chance to race with those kind of tires because he was a TT, left and right hand, and there was one dump.
Yeah.
And the guys, they had slick tires, they had downpipes, bultacos and stuff. Well, the way it turned out, I don't think the guy in second place has finished yet. I won it, and I look at that trophy sitting on my fireplace every day. Indiana Championship TT in 1967.
And this is on a brand new Husky that you just took out of the crate.
Yes, yep.
Put it together at the track on Nobby's. That is just fascinating.
Yeah. And people around Edison told me this many times because he thought it was funny, and I guess it is funny. After the race, people came around and stood there looking at my bike and wanted to talk to me, and all I could say was, it's a Husqvarna, it's a Swedish quality, very good motorcycle. I talk like that, and he heard people say, oh, those Californians, they sure talk funny, don't they? And because also I was entered not as Lars Larsson from Sweden.
Why is that? What happened?
I was I was Larry Larsson, Lawson, from San Diego, and that's why I spoke funny. I was not allowed to take part in non-FIM sanctioned events. Then I would have been banned for life.
Oh, okay.
So that's why we faked the name and where I was from, and that's how it started. So then, the following day, he told me what the service job was. It was to take the Ford van, the motorcycle, and go around and see dealers. And the way you did that, he said, you come into town, you stop here, and there's a phone booth and a phone catalog. And you look at the yellow pages and the 2-3 pages that says motorcycle. You tear it out and you go and see the dealers. Oh, okay. That was my training as a salesman.
Now, Husqvarna wasn't even really in the country yet. There were no dealers. So you were seeing what, BSA dealers, Yamaha dealers? Who were you seeing?
Yeah, my first stop was in Toledo, Ohio, by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And he went around with me before that to a couple of dealers and introduced the bike and blah, 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 and then he said, this is how you do it, Lars. And then he left. And he gave me some money so I could put gasoline and stay at the hotel. And Toledo was the first, so I took the first off-ramp. I saw the telephone booth, tear the pages out, and did not understand yet how the American freeway system, how that works. You take I-70 to I-10, west, and you're there. I went, of course, I started in one end of Toledo. I had to drive through town all the way to the other side to the first dealer.
Okay.
He didn't want to talk to me. The second dealer was where I started. So I had to drive back to town, which took a long time versus had I understood how to take the freeway. The second guy didn't want to talk to me either. I give you one guess where the third dealership was.
On the other side of town. Back where the first one was.
A couple of blocks away from the first guy.
So, Lord, in those first couple of months or so, you're in Ohio, you're riding around in this Ford van, you got a couple of bucks from Medicine Dye. Were you selling any bikes, and how was the racing going in between, or wasn't there any?
Oh, there was racing every weekend because that they were interested in at the dealership. Hey, you come back here, boy. This weekend we have a this or that kind of event. We show you how to ride. Oh, okay. So I go back then. Excuse me. Race whatever type of event they had,
Mm-hmm.
And I sold bikes. The first bikes I sold was at the Xenia, Ohio.
Okay.
Competition accessories. They were a mama and papa little shop underneath their house in the basement or garage.
Yes.
And they were selling tacos, and I showed up there, and I went into the store, and I said, hello. I wonder you come outside, look, motorcycle. And they looked at me like, where the hell is this guy coming from? So they went out, and I rolled out the Husky, and I said, Husqvarna, Swedish quality, a good motorcycle, and I turned on the fuel and kicked it, and it started on the first kick, and that got their attention instantly. And I drove across the street into a field and popped some wheelies and rode around, and then came back and stopped. And the guy said, how many do we have to buy? Oh, you need to buy 3 bikes. 3 bikes, and this is how much they cost. And okay, sign us up. And after that, it was like a piece of cake. It was a lot of fun things happen. I always tell the story about it. It took me just about a week to get a steak to eat in this country.
To get a steak?
Yeah. I every night I sat down and I said, can I have a beef steak? And they gave me some kind of a chopped up meat, like a hamburger style thing. And so I think it was on the 7th day, I went into a Howard Johnson, and they had pictures in the menu. And they had pictures of a beef steak, a steak.
Yes.
And I said, I want a beef steak, no hamburger.
And that's how you got
it. So I got a steak. And at the same time, every night, I asked for pommes frites. Yeah. Oh, they didn't have that. And I said, well, give me anything I need to eat,
Yeah.
And they gave me pommes frites, and I thought, Jesus, these people are dumb. What's going on?
Because they don't know that.
They don't call it pommes frites, they call it French
fries. Yeah. So now things were going well, and you're racing and you're selling motorcycles. And I guess it was now, 1968, where now Edison Dye had a new idea. He was going to create an actual racing series and bring over some of the fast European guys to race against a few Americans. Of course, you were there.
No, I had to stop you there.
Oh, that wasn't until 71. I'm sorry. That wasn't until 71.
No, Thorsten was here in 66.
Okay.
In 67.
Yeah.
At the same time, he brought me over. Mm-hmm. Then he brought Thorsten and Åke Johnson and Staffan Ennequist from Husqvarna.
Yeah.
He brought Joel De Coster and Dave Bickers on the ZZ. And we went around. Back east started. The first race was in Sedan, Kansas. And that's where I bought my what's it called? Stetson cowboy hat.
A Stetson cowboy.
Because I was going to take that back home to Sweden, after my year was up. So I had a proof that I've been in America. But that's where the first race went, and then they went back to Pepperell, I think, and I didn't go with them back there. And then he brought it out, so I forgot where they went out here first, but just before Christmas in 67.
Yes.
That's the first time, by the way, I got to set foot in California, where I was supposed to be for a year.
Oh.
I flew out and we had the first race here in Tejisa, just outside San Diego. I remember Thorsten was hurt, so I took his bike and raced it. And that was the initial, so to speak, with a squad of Euro riders for motocross.
I see. So this wasn't the Inter-Am yet.
No, then in 68.
Yeah.
I don't know what did they call it, the Inter-Am in the
I don't think it was
fall. Because then it was a full series. And then 68, 69, and was it in 70 they started a summer series as well. And that's where I rode my Titanium Husky.
right.
So the 68 was then he had it planned out, starting on the East Coast and all the way out until it hit the West Coast. And at that time, he also got Mako people involved. He was very clever. He didn't want just Husqvarna people because, competition, it creates more competition or more sales. So he, in my way of thinking, he was very clever to get the season and get the Mako people here as well. And I mean, we all know the answer. The motocross, it started a wildfire.
Yeah.
And then I think it also branched out. Well, there's another story behind all of this. The AMA saw the opportunity here, so they were going to try to ace him out. Because back in those days, there was called AFM, American Federation Motorcyclist.
Yes.
They were the one that was associated with FIM. And that's where he got the permit to do the races with Roger and Joel and everybody, because then they could come and race here. Had they come over here and all had fake names, that would have been too obvious. So he had to have a sanction, FIM sanction, and the way to get that was through the AFM.
I see.
And then, I'm trying to think here, 69 or was it 70 that AMA started to, this is big. We got to try to get this. So they started a series with, it must have been 70, because I think Joel and Sylvain Gibors was riding that series together with some English people and competing against the Edisons. He still had Roger and Torsten and Aki and those guys.
Yeah.
And that and it all ended up in a big fight, I guess. I don't know. So AMA took it over, and I knew from that day, Edison died. He hated AMA with a passion. But the sport was the way it took off. It was incredible.
Let's talk a bit, and we're going to get back to the titanium frame Husky, but there's a question I wanted to ask you, and I didn't want to get too far ahead without doing it. You had a successful international six-day trials career. You won several gold medals for Sweden and the USA, and then somehow you wound up on a Mexican team to race six-day trials. How did you and why did you have a Mexican team?
Well, every year over here, we had to ride the qualifiers. They were qualifiers back in Michigan and back in Massachusetts and in Texas and up in Oregon. And you had to qualify and get certain points to be able to even go to 6 days as an American.
Okay.
And one year, because of we're kind of jumping history here a little bit, but anyway, due to my work, I did not have time to do all the qualifiers. And I talked to Al Ames, who was the big shot at AMA, and I said, Al, you know who I am. You know I've ridden 6 days before. I race every weekend out here. Enduros, I ride motocrosses. I don't have time this year. Oh, if you want to go to 6 days, you got to do the qualifiers. So, I don't know if God or whoever controls us sent me the message, call Mexico. They have a FIM down there. So I called the FIM sanctioned or office in Mexico City. And I said, hey, we're 3 guys that needs licenses to ride as a club team in 6 days. Long story short, I flew down there and had a Swedish lady that lived there being the translator. I bought the 3 licenses, and the first Mexican team was me, Dr. Fred Cameron from San Francisco, and Jim Simmons from Missouri. We went to Sweden because at the same time the 6 days was in Sweden, and they had to shoot me before I would miss the ride in my home country.
Right.
So that's why I went through all this trouble, and I went into Tijuana, as I live in San Diego, and bought 3 huge sombreros that were embroidered with Mexico on it, and we paraded in the opening ceremony, the 3 of us, with those big sombreros. And I remember, because it was in a little western cowboy town, like a amusement park. That's where the Park Fermé and the start of 6 days was. So we were walking down these little narrow streets, with, so to speak, bars and stores on the sides, and I could hear some of the children looking at us, and they said, "Mommy, these guys, they don't look different from us." and and we were pretending to be Mexicans.
Well,
so that's how I ended up. And what that brought on, that I got, people got to know this in Mexico, and they were riding in tours down there. So they invited me to come down there the year after and talking to me, and rode one of their events. And 2 or 3 years from then we had a trophy team Mexican and a VOS team Mexican. And they are still competing in the 6 days every year.
Wow. That's just...
So, yeah, it's a kind of a neat story.
It is.
Yeah.
How a Swedish guy came to America to go to Mexico to get a license to get back to Sweden. That's an interesting...
Yeah.
Hey, Lars, in 71, you arrived at Indian Dunes on what appeared to be a relatively stock-looking Husky, with the exception of aluminum tank. It was anything but stock, and later we learned that the frame was actually made of titanium, and it had a lot of trick parts on that bike. Who developed the idea to build a titanium frame, and how many were built?
Well, you're kind of jumping the history forward or too fast, so to speak. I don't know how much time we have.
Lars, I have no place to be. If you have time, I have time. Because Supercross is over, and I don't care about any other ball sports. I'm talking to Lars. If you just tuned in, I'm speaking to Lars Larsson, and we're going to be talking for as long as Lars wants to talk. So back me up a little bit, Lars. Tell me about the titanium frame Husky, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, now, after my year with Edison, I had a 1-year contract. And during that year and my traveling, setting up dealers and everything, I recognized that, hey, they don't have motocross pants, they don't have motocross boots, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So I was talking to Torsten, and I said, hey, I think we ought to try to open up a business here, because they got nothing here. And we're selling motorcycles to them, but they need all this special equipment, And so, yeah, can you stay in this country? I don't know. And back in those days, to get a 1-year visa, you had to go through a lot of medical things. They took x-rays on my lung. They took syphilis tests, all kinds of stuff. And I thought, well, that's what you do to be able to get to America.
That's right.
What I didn't understand was that when I got my visa, it was a green card.
Oh.
So when we start talking about open up a business here, I had to go down to the government office here in town and said, excuse me, what do I have to do to stay in United States, because we're thinking about open up a business here? And they said, well, let's see what kind of documents do you have? Why are you here? And I showed them, and they said, you have a green card. Welcome to America. You can stay as long as you want to work.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Bye. And so I said, Torsten, we can do it. But Torsten is in Sweden. I'm here. There was a young, wonderful woman working for Edison, a Swedish girl, Birgitta Berlin. And she was doing bookkeeping and all the paperwork for Edison. So I said, well, we got to hire her, because I can't do the paperwork and selling stuff at the same time. And so we went to her. Hey, Birgitta, you're going to come and work for us, because Torsten and I, we're going to open up a business. And she kind of just smiled like, yeah, fat chance, and, oh, okay. And she was quiet for a little bit, and she said, but I join you. Okay. So the three of us put money together and opened up Torsten Harman Racing. And we started to import all the Halvarsson made the clothing for us. Lindstrand made the boots. And we had a company that made socks, that made shirts, made gloves, Trelleborg tires, and it started over again. I mean, Birgitta did the paperwork. Torsten got us the connections over there with the different factories, and I did the selling. I was on the road again, and at the same time, the final that we took this step was that I went to Daytona and I met with John Penton, and I told him that what our plans were, but we weren't sure. And he looked at me, and I still don't believe it, but he said, Lars, if you guys open up that business, I send you a container of Penton motorcycles, and you be the West Coast distributor for Penton motorcycles.
Sounds like a good plan.
And he says, as you sell the bikes, you pay me.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't think this would happen today, but back in 1968, it happened like that. And I strongly believe the tipping thing that we opened Harman Racing was because of John Penton gave us that gave us the chance. Okay, that would be good business, and that's how it started. Now we can go back into the titanium bike.
Tell me about that. You arrive at Indian Dunes on a stock-looking Husky, but it's not, and it's got this trick titanium frame. Whose idea was it to come up with that bike? How did that happen?
It was a guy. I am for my life trying to remember his name. That came, and I know he was buddies with the people that was called Valerians Husqvarna up in the valley. Do you remember that name?
I remember the name, but I can't tell you the name of.
No, but it was one of their buddies, and that's one of the dealers that I did set up. So, but anyway, this guy came. God, I can't remember his name. Came one day down and started to talk. Hey, what do you think about using titanium to make handlebars, to make frames and stuff? And I kind of looked at her. Well, I don't know. And I think he's the one that he said we know a factory that can weld titanium and stuff, and that was Prefab, Pete Wilkins.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we went there and made the prototype, and to me, still the only frame for the small Husky engine. The other frames were built for the bigger, the new engines from Husqvarna. But anyway, we built that frame and put it together. And that summer series that went from Indian Dunes, we went to Colorado, we went to Unadilla. Where were we in between? Denver, Colorado, yeah. And it was 5 or 6 races across the nation. And at the first race in Indian Dune, I remember there was a little tab, a bracket that broke off, and that was the only thing that ever happened to that frame. So came Monday, we had to weld that bracket, had the bracket welded back to it.
Yeah.
But then it was flawless, and I was lucky. I mean, the bike was so light, it was a dream to ride, and I was lucky to winning just about all the races on the bike. And unfortunately, and I think Dick Mann was the man behind it, or at least that's what I was told. He made sure that titanium was outlawed. and the claim was they didn't know for sure if titanium would hold up, and blah blah blah, and the cost, and I tried to argue, what were you talking about the cost? What about the guy that comes in a big motorhome versus the guy that comes with a bike in the trunk, or the guy that rolls up to the starting line every motor with new tires on?
Yeah.
I mean, who are you going to stop? What do you say?
Progress?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you can't use it. And I mean, we made handlebars and a few other products, and we sold a bunch of those things. And then, but it was outlawed.
Now, your particular bike was lost in a car crash.
No.
Oh, Lars, you're really making. I tell you, I thought I was doing very good research. Every time I tell a story, you tell me no now, Lars. But I'm glad you're here to straighten things out.
Yeah. We can. I still remember things back in the days. I have a problem remember what happened last week.
Okay.
But as they outlawed it, we took the motor out of the frame.
Yes.
Put it in a stock Husky, and went to Texas. We sent the truck to Texas to race, and on the way back, the guys that were driving the truck was in a wreck, and the bikes that were in the back burned to the ground. So my motor, my 400 motor that was in that I had used that summer in the titanium frame,
Yes.
was burnt to the ground. The bike was still sitting here.
Ah. Okay.
So then, when it came to that, now I'm starting to wonder about the years, but the bike was sitting here, and this AMA Hall of Fame museum,
Yeah.
they were going to do a big motocross exhibit a few years back, and Youngblood called me and said, "Hey, can we borrow your titanium bike?" And I said, "Yeah, but I will put a 250 engine in it because I don't have a motor." And he said, "Well, that will be fine." So when the bike was in the AMA museum,
Yeah.
it had a 250 engine in it and a hooker header pipe, and which I still have. And then when it came out of that museum, it went into it was there for 2 years or 2.5 years, something. And then I got the bike back, and it was put in the San Diego Auto and Motorcycle Museum. Have you ever been down there in Balboa Park?
No, I have not.
Yeah, pretty nice place. anyway, so it was there for a couple of years. And then I brought it back home, and I had obtained a few 400 engines. So I thought one day I'm going to fix a motor, and because the bike should have a 400 engine in it. And as I was working on that, this Terry Good guy back from Chicago that is working on a big museum back there.
Yes, I'm familiar with Terry Good.
Yeah, so that's where the bike is. It's going to be in that museum.
Oh, maybe you go back to Chicago like when you first came to America.
Yeah, the circle, what is it they say?
The circle of life.
Circle.
Yeah, the circle of life.
And maybe I get a steak to eat when I'm back there.
Oh, well, I'm going to go with you, Lars, and we're going to have some pommes frites when we get there, too.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you this. You once said that Marty Tripes was one of the greatest natural talents you had ever seen. You thought that perhaps he was born with handlebars in his hands. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Garrett Wolsink last week. Did you think maybe in the early 70s that the Americans would make such progress and become such great riders early on when you first saw them?
Well, I mean, history speaks for itself.
It does, but I want to know what you thought when you first got here, you know?
Well, when I first got here, I didn't really understand what I was doing.
Okay.
But it didn't take the Americans long to catch on to this game. And as they started the Supercross, they developed their own style and their own techniques that were different from the European regular motocross tracks, but they could use some of the new techniques on a regular motocross track, which was difficult for the Europeans to adapt. I remember at a GP in Carlsbad, and I was, with the Swedes, of course, and I was around, I think I was in the jury, or if I took part in the two Swedes, I forgot. But anyway, I stood and watched the American going down one of the hills, and I saw how they used Supercross technique, and I stopped Håkan Karlqvist, and I said, Håkan, stand here for a lap and look at who they were. I forgot which ones of the Americans, 2-3 of them that did the same thing. And he looked and he said, I know, Lars, but I don't know how to do that.
Wow.
And and by that time, I mean, you could see, of course, there's going to be a developing of the American riders. You have 400 million people to take from. Sweden had 8 million people. So, of course, there's going to be champions coming out of here. But the difference is, how should I explain it? I mean, we had American world champion, David, Brad Lackey, Danny Laporte started the thing, so to speak. But very few of the Americans went over there, I think because of the difficulties for them to travel. You can, in a car, driving the speed limit, you can hit 5-6 countries in one day.
Yeah.
People kind of look different. They speak a totally different language. Their food is different. And I think that kept Americans. I mean, they could have sent 25 Americans over there. That would have placed 1 to 25 if it wasn't for the different cultures and everything.
Well,
plus over here they got such a star call it, star
treatment.
Yeah, I mean.
No, I get it, Lars.
I mean, they became heroes, and they had 60, 70,000 people at a Supercross, and still today, they are the heroes. Now they are Tumac and those guys.
Yeah.
But they are heroes. They had such a star status. So I think that why would we go over there and fight the different cultures and everything? This is just my philosophy. Because we have, how many American champions can you name?
Well,
Laporte and Lackey,
Travis
Bobby Moore,
yeah. Travis Parker.
Travis Parker. Now I come to a standstill.
Well, these are not things. These are things I should know too, but I don't know everything.
Yeah.
All right.
Elias was second, I think. But there's Americans that has been over there. We forgot the 250 guy. What was his name from back east? Smith. Something. Not Maury, but...
Oh, Schmidt, Donnie Schmidt.
Donnie Schmidt, yeah. But basically, of all the motocrossers in America, there are, not more than a dozen that has been over there for a season.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could every now and then one flew over and won a Grand Prix and flew back over here. I strongly believe because they developed their own style of motocross. And that's why they were so successful, and that's why they won so many motocross the nations in a row. But now I guess today the Europeans has caught on to it and learned from the Americans, and they're putting up a fight.
Yeah. Well, Lars, I think you brought up a good point in the beginning of the interview where you talked about the U.S. Grand Prix, and you didn't read about it in the L.A. Times the next day, or if something happened in Unadilla, New York, I didn't see it in the New York Times. But in Sweden, it was in the newspaper every week because it was such a big sport there, and it was popular there. I don't know if the FIM and the way they make it today, if they make it to seem that a world championship is so important anymore. I don't know. I don't see it. And you could see it by the turnout when you watch an MXGP on television. There's nobody there.
No, it's quite frankly, I don't really consider it anymore a world championship.
No.
And due to the fact that every country can send their best, whether they are good enough or not, has nothing to do with it. Back in the old days, every country was allowed to send X amount of riders to the GP. Mm-hmm. And they, if you rode the GP, you were paid to ride. Now it's money talks, and you have to pay your way. Anybody could, in a sense, buy himself into, if you have enough money, to a team that would go riding the World Championship.
Yeah.
Well, there's no World Championship if there's no Norwegian, no Finns, no Swedes, no
right.
Danes in it.
Yeah.
For example. And to me, the World Championship is here. The outdoor. Anybody can ride the outdoor. And it doesn't cost a fortune. I don't know what the starting thing is, $40, $100, but it's peanuts versus what it costs to enter a GP.
Mm-hmm.
And here everybody can go and ride on national. And but and they are, of course.
Lars.
That's more a GP to me
Then,
than a GP in Indonesia.
yeah, I know what you mean. Believe me,
Yeah.
and we could go on about that for another hour. But I've got a very interesting somebody. How can I put it, Lars? I'm not going to name names, but I understand that there was a very special dinner for the state of Sweden. It's called the State of Sweden Banquet. And I'd like you to explain to the listeners what the State of Sweden Banquet is about and how at one time some very special tableware went missing.
I don't know why you hear all these things from.
I got some friends,
There's a yearly, it's actually a luncheon at the Royal Castle in Stockholm, and where people are invited to this luncheon. And however, I am not over the radio like this into that story due to the fact that the story has to be told in live audience, and I hope you can appreciate that.
Well, we have some people listening, Lars, and I was really hoping you would tell us more about it, but maybe you have to come back next time and tell us, or maybe I'll come with the...
You know what, the story is not only words, it's like an acting, how you tell this story, and you can't do that if you can't see me or whoever would tell that story. So I'm not gonna go. You cannot. I won't go any further on that one. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, we'll have to talk about that again. Now, Scott Wallenberg told me to ask you about teamwork, and when I said to him, "What do you mean by teamwork?" he says, "Just ask Lars; he'll tell you."
Well, it has to do with the same story.
Oh, you see, I didn't know that.
He has heard the story, and I guess this Terry Good, he is supposed to have, although it has been postponed, what do you call it?
A banquet, a fundraiser, yeah.
Yeah. Are you gonna go to that one?
I'm supposed to be in Australia at that time, but if the Australia trip doesn't happen because of this whole COVID-19 thing, then yes, I probably will be there.
Okay, that would be a place where I could tell that story.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'm gonna be patient, and I'm gonna wait, and we're going to let you tell that story when I see you. Now, Lars, we only have a few minutes left, really, and you know why? We have more time, but not really for that kind of a thing. You know, Lars, you got a birthday coming up on July 5th next week. And are you going to be 79 or 80?
79.
Okay. Are you all right? Now, I read somewhere that around 2005 there was an interview that said you had been racing for like 50 years and you probably have finished like 1,400 or 1,450 motos. Now this was in 2005, so that was 15 years ago.
Yeah, this is my 61st season straight, never stopped.
Wow.
Although that this season has been short so far, we only got in 3 or 4 races. The last one was first week of March.
Yeah.
And then they closed down the joints. So I haven't been on a motorcycle since. But now they're saying that we're going back racing the 28th of July. But it's my 61st season. And, I am blessed by being part of what they call the Motocross Action magazine, the Wrecking Crew.
Yes.
So we get to ride all the bikes and everything. And Jody Weissel, who's the boss there, he says, Lars, after you turn 80, you can quit.
Well, you got a couple of years ahead of you, Let. So, not really, just really another one. So,
yeah.
Anyway, Lars Larsson, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Well,
and
I thank you for having me.
Yeah. And I hope I do see you in Chicago because I'm looking forward to hearing the State of Sweden story. And apparently it must be a good one, and you have to move your hands and do some things, I guess, to tell the story. So,
Yeah.
but we will catch up sooner than later, Lars. Thank you again,
Okay.
and an early happy birthday to you, my friend.
Thank you very much.
Take care,
Goodbye.
Lars. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
My guest today was Lars Larsson, and I was told by Scott Cox and I was told by Scott Wallenberg and a few other people to get Lars to tell the story about the state of Sweden. And I was really surprised that he really wouldn't go into that with me. So I guess I'll have to wait and somehow tell everybody that story at a later date. But in the meantime, I want to thank my sponsors again for today, Preston Petty Products, The Legend Continues, AMSOIL, the first in synthetic oil since 1973, Vintco, Keep the Ride Going. And of course, please join me Wednesday night at 6 p.m. here on Facebook for another episode of Vintage Motocross Q&A. Thank you all for listening. Have a great afternoon. We'll talk to you soon.